Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 183. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the internationally acclaimed and wildly creative multimedia storyteller, Mel Cartagena. Mel.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where in the globe you are. It's always afternoon somewhere in the globe. Thank you so much, Barney, for having me over.
Yeah, it's great to see you. You're an East Coaster as well, right? You're on the East Coast?
I am in Massachusetts, yeah, so I am on Eastern Standard Time, yes.
Okay, good.
And it's afternoon in here.
Perfect. I'm right north of you. I'm in Vermont, so this is great. So,
all right, yeah, we're fellow New Englanders just sitting down to have a chat about comics.
That's right.
And storytelling in general, storytelling as a whole.
And I know, and I said what I love. I love the title that you give yourself. I think it's pretty cool. Multimedia storyteller.
Yes, I consider myself to be more a writer than a cartoonist. Like I love comics, but I love audio drama. I love like an audio-driven narrative, and it's something that's come back now with the internet becoming what it is, and the tech available now, where you can actually create something with your phone or with a tablet. I want to get into that. I want to try that as well. I love movies as well, and in fact, I started with movies. I made a bunch of short films. Have wanted to make a feature for some time, but I haven't really connected with a group of people who are, let's do it, man. Let's just dive into it and do it just for the fun of it, just so we can do it. So I shifted gears. I was like, well, what else can I do where I have to rely on as few people as possible? So I went into comics, and I produced this comic that I'm sharing with people like you and other fellow creators. But I love storytelling in all forms, and we are in a time now where even though the storytelling itself is a little fractured, it's a little different, with like, I don't know if you ever watch YouTube web series. There is some really clever, fascinating stuff being done by YouTubers using their phones, using still photos, using audio. And I love that. I love that stuff. I love to see just how, I would almost describe it as Burroughsian, and that it's very fitting the idea of William S. Burroughs of the cut-ups. When you take text, take that other text, cut it, recombinate it into different forms of storytelling. I see people doing that in video and audio on YouTube, and it's really fascinating. So it's something else I want to try as well.
And I want to talk to us about that. I read your latest book that you came out, The Plot, which was extremely engaging. It was really fun.
Awesome.
I love the art style and just the design you put into it. So first of all, kind of take our audience, those that might be listening to it, or in their cars or whatever, just to kind of give people a little bit of background on The Plot. That's the name of it for those wondering. The name of the graphic novel is called The Plot. It's 127 pages. It has a shadow conspiracy government kind of edge to it. Do you want to kind of give people a bit of a background on the book?
Okay, yeah. So as you said, it's called The Plot. Now, the basic premise that drives the plot is there's a character named Corman. He's involved in an incident, in a fatal incident in which somebody dies. And next thing he knows, he is in an interrogation room with these people who act like law, but don't look like law. They look more like men in black, let's call them that for now. And gradually, through an intense interrogation, bits and pieces of something is revealed. And it leads to a discovery where he really is a minor incidental part in something much greater, in a much greater plot, let's say, in a much greater plot that I don't want to get too much into. But what that little premise does is it takes you through what I call psychocultural debris of America, and that it takes conspiracy theories. It takes some espionage lore and oh my God, what do they call that? The urban legend. It takes espionage urban legends. And I'm taking all this debris and I'm mashing it into this suspense story about how would I say, about how you go through your life and you find out that maybe there's all these things happening around you and you have no idea until something happens, something that feels very innocent and casual, but it just keeps building and building into this thing, which I'm not going to reveal, but it's there on the book and very plain. It's not a complicated thing at all. It's very straightforward.
What was your inspiration behind the script of this?
So it's a number of things. Like I said, I am a big fan. I don't necessarily believe in conspiracy theories, but I find that stuff fascinating. I love like the theories are on JFK, the theories around aliens, the theories around Men in Black. Like I find this stuff fascinating because that's what I call psychocultural debris, and that it's sort of it's been circulating around it kind of commingles a little bit with the urban legends, but it never goes away. When you think of trends, something that's around for a little while and it goes away, this stuff just never goes away. It's always kind of circling the fringes of pop culture. It's always just going in circles around, and then once in a while, it kind of introduces itself into the main influx of pop culture. And so I took these elements, and I took the idea of like a Hitchcock's idea of the wrong man, someone who, seemingly innocent person, very average person, involved in something grand but not knowing it. I just took those two things and I crafted this little book. Now, what's interesting about that for me creatively is that it was a bunch of artwork that had no dialogue. I made this artwork. I was just following an impulse. I think I had just read Peter Cooper's The System. I don't know if you ever had a chance to read that. It's a great little story of corruption and yeah, it's a story about corrupt systems, about how like law and crime commingle, and it's wordless. It's a really cool thing that is completely wordless. You see everything, how a number of transactions happen, which spawn all these incidents, and then it kind of starts over again. I had read that and I was like, that is so cool. Like I like the idea of no words, like I think before that I had read someone, I don't know, I want to say Brian Michael Bendis, but I could be wrong. But it was just Bendis is the opposite. Bendis is too much dialogue. Like I find him funny and quirky, but sometimes it's too much. So the system was a great antidote to Brian Michael Bendis. And I guess somewhere in between those two influences, they were very fresh in my head. They were still going around. So I started making all these drawings that have no dialogue. It's just action. I'm doing this thing. I finish it. I'm a little disappointed because I don't feel like I have enough for a story there. I kind of put it aside. This is towards 2019. 2020 starts, and then the whole bunch of things that happens. We go into lockdown, and I start looking at the artwork again, and I start seeing something that I hadn't seen before. Maybe, I don't know, like the things that happened since influenced what I was looking at. Like I had a perspective, and I looked at it again anew, and I start kind of experimenting with it. I photocopy some pages. I take little post-its and I start putting dialogue to it. Like I post them over a particular art and write dialogue. And that kind of spawned the next bit of dialogue. And I'm getting excited now because it's like, okay, I thought I didn't have anything, but I think I have something here. And I kept doing that for a number of weeks until eventually I realized, like, yeah, if I just reuse certain panels but use dialogue differently, I have sort of dramatic tension. I have a narrative that continues and keeps building on itself and sort of drops information in nuggets and pieces, which is sort of to me how the mind works. Like you take information. So yeah, I wanted to explore how information, your perception of something, can change with time, because I had all these pages, but I didn't feel I had anything. I didn't feel I had an entire narrative. And I was a little kind of disappointed by that because I made short pieces in comics, like little 4 or 5 page stories, 10, 12 page stories, and little comic book essays type things. But I hadn't yet made the book. And I feel like that's kind of the rite of passage of any creator. Like you have to make the book, like the thing, like the novel, the whole length narrative. So I was a little disappointed by that. But I was kind of both excited and surprised to find out that even though I felt I didn't have a book, I actually did have one. I just simply, sometime had to happen. And I guess I had to live a little more and sort of change my perception about that and get a little more experimental, to do almost like the cut-ups, like the thing that William S. Burroughs used to do for whenever he was stuck with his own writing. He would take text, rip it apart, reassemble it in different ways. And he found that gave him ideas for his writing. So I kind of did the same thing. I took the artwork, I put little post-its, would write dialogue. I was like, no, rip that out, put another post-it on it, write that dialogue, and keep going from that. I'm finding that I actually did have an entire book. So that was a bit of a really pleasant reveal for myself, to realize, no, I had a book. It's just, I don't know, my thinking was broken. It wasn't all the way over to that end and had to change. And then, oh, okay, there it is. Yeah, I do have something.
I want to talk about the style of the book. I love there seems to be a very specific choice in how you make the word bubbles, the thickness of the line on some of these, using the font. Talk to us a bit about that from the design perspective, on your choice of font and and in the word bubbles?
Okay, the style comes from I try to do very formal comics, like Marvel. I'm not a superhero guy, but
Right.
you sort of, I don't know, maybe this happened to you as well. The influence of Marvel, or rather the greats, the people who made Marvel what it is, Jack Kirby, John Buscema, Jim Lee, like that influence is something that you cannot escape it. As a
Right.
cartoonist, you sort of can't get away from that, even if you're not into superheroes. And I'm very much in that place. I don't particularly care for superheroes, but when you look at a layout from Jack Kirby, like boom, like it knocks you back, like you feel the force of that. So I try imitating that. But gradually I'm finding that I'm not really into drawing. So it's like, well, what am I gonna do? Like I don't wanna have to look for an artist because the main problem that I feel is that I cannot find reliable people to work with. I tried doing that. I tried finding a few artists very early on, but it never quite worked out. Like they would communication would stop after a little while, or they just simply never got back to you after a couple of messages traded. So I was like, well, I'm gonna have to learn how to draw. I start doing that. I take basic lessons at the local art community place, and I'm good enough. But I
Mm.
realized like I don't have the motivation to be, as good as like Jack Kirby or John Buscema, who draw beautifully, who drew like classical, proportions and such. But what along the way, I just keep reading comics. I discover people like Jim Mahfood or Food One. He goes by Food One, and he has a very squiggly, like messy style. But
Right.
like that spoke to me immediately, like on a gut level. I reacted to that. I'm like, that is so cool. Like he doesn't worry so much about making it perfect. He worries more about energy. The truth of the line. Let's call it that. A line that is truthfully done without any intention to be pretty, other than just to be pretty, and some really quirky, inventive storytelling. And one that kind of unlocked the gate for me, made me realize, oh, it's okay. You can totally do a comic without being a great artist. Was Matt Kine. I started reading Pistol Whip a few years ago, and it's almost like stick figures. It's a little more than stick figures, but he did something so clever with time and layouts on the page that I was like, that is so cool. Like I want to do something like that. And I started reading more of his work. I started reading Revolver, which is one involving alternate timelines. And I don't mean that as an insult. His
Mm.
artwork is not exactly great, but his storytelling is right up my alley. Like the stuff involving alternate realities, secret agents, science fiction. Like that's kind of my thing. I live in that space. And it was very encouraging to read his books. It was like a thrill to read that. And it's like, oh, I could do this. I can lean more into what I'm good at, or rather what I feel more passionate about, which is writing. That's really where I'm coming from the writing. So it's like, I'm gonna start doing that. I'm not really good at color. I don't really know how to work with color. You still don't really. So I'm going to stay in black and white, or rather, I start black and white. But I'm realizing I'm not very good at that. I'm very influenced by Frank Miller at this point, by that black and white that he does. But I can do very simple ink washes, and I happen to have these pencils called Sketch and Wash pencils. I don't know if you ever heard of those. It's like a pencil. It's like a fat lead pencil, but you can use it
Okay.
dry, and you can do something like shading. But if you wet it, you start getting gray shading. That's like, okay, I can do that. I can manage that. Like I'll work with that rather than like wait till I get good at something. I just don't have that discipline. I know that I'm not gonna spend months trying to be really good to get shade and subtle gradations and all that. Like I want to tell a story now. Like there's a need to say it now. There's urgency. There's kind of internal pressure. I don't know if that happens to you when you do your own stuff.
Mm.
There's that need, that inner pressure to tell a story. So I start doing it, following, like the ideas from Jim Matthew, which is a very messy thing. It's multimedia. So I started first. I have like cheap mixed media paper, like Canson mixed media paper. I started doing pencils, and out of an impulse, I don't even know why I did it. I had this really opaque gesso, and I start coating the page after I do the pencil. And what that did is enabled me to not have to erase pencils. Like the pencils are there, but they're buried in this very opaque white coating. And what I noticed by surprise, that what that did is it made the page thicker. It gave it a texture of roughness that's almost like canvas, like a little bit like canvas. And I was really
Okay.
excited by that. I was like, oh, awesome. So I take this Sketch and Wash pencil and I run a wet brush over it. I can get these gray shadings and it doesn't destroy the paper, which is something that I tried doing earlier with like just mixed media paper, and it just eventually would rip through the paper.
Mm.
So I'm now really excited. Like, okay, I got something going on here. I don't really know what it is, but I'm not going to question it. I'm going to keep going. And that's essentially that's it. It picked up speed after the first few pages. I'm getting excited about it, and I'm thinking more of the narrative side. And I'm like, okay, I want to explore outdated technologies. Like I love the idea of like analog tech. Like I'm a big fan of analog. I like to shoot film, even though I use digital predominantly. I like shooting with film, so I want to incorporate that. I like shifting viewpoints in novels and in other things. So I want to do a little bit of that. I want to shift the viewpoint suddenly with no warning. I'm going to put you in the protagonist's perspective, which is a little surreal and a little scary. And then I want to do something that feels like a big buildup. Like I love what people do with action movies, like say James Cameron with Terminator 2, how he keeps building. Each confrontation builds until you get this epic, amazing thing at the end of the movie. So I'm a fan of that, and I try to do that within the scale of this.
Right.
And then after I just did the artwork, and the artwork is 12 by 18 pages, 12 by 18 pages done sideways instead of the portrait. Right. I did it landscape. So that was that. That was just the basic artwork. The digital part was discovering the platform Canva and finding that they actually have a template called Comic Strip. I'm like, I like this. Like, if I take this and I just sort of explore, I can have like how would I say, almost like a boxing match, like a back and forth. Like one person says something, then this person says something else, and then I set a new page, and that new page sort of picks up.
No, but I love what you said about the boxing match piece. That's pretty cool. I look at that, and that's what's going to be my next question, is about how you separate it out, and it almost gives it a cinematic feel. You're having your pages horizontal instead of vertical like a standard comic. This gives it more of a cinematic piece, but also, as you say, it's 2 frames. It's 2 panels on each page, and it gives it that back and forth feel, and it does kind of give it that sense of tension as well, based off of the fact that it's heavy black borders with the left and right, almost like that boxing match piece. And so what was that inspiration for?
That came about, part of it came from Junji Ito, because not just Junji Ito, a lot of people, but he's the name that I can think of at the moment who does that best, who takes advantage of the format of comics. You know how, like, let's say he will set up a situation, but you don't get the full payoff until you flip the page. You flip to the final page, and you have something amazing, like just a terrifying thing, or some line, or some action, something. So he understands the medium well of using that to create suspense. So I kind of borrowed that. The cinematic side comes because I'm very influenced by cinema. Cinema is the landscape. You have a landscape framing, and the dynamic that you talk about comes from that, from sort of trying to coexist in those 2 spaces at once. On the one hand, I have wide angle pages, but on the other one, I want to try to create the back and forth, the boxing match feeling of 2 characters sort of conflicting each other. Then I pick it up on the next one, and maybe the illusion is that one character is winning on one page, but then the match goes in the other direction on the next page. So hopefully, I think I should pull that off. That'll create a sense of tension. Like, you as a reader, you'll start feeling like a sense of anxiety, like a building anxiety as this thing continues. And then the Men in Black start over again from another angle, the interrogation. And it feels like maybe it's coming to an end, but then they start over again from another angle. And hopefully, like, if that imaging and that cropping and that framing comes together in your mind as a reader, that'll give you like a sense of anxiety, like a sense of like exhaustion, like, oh my God, is this going to end? Like, how long is this going to go on for? Hopefully that will be the idea. And I tried little things, like you mentioned, like, for example, the page you're holding now, I see that there's a lot of space between them. One thing that I try, probably people don't notice, but I kind of wanted to explore that, is sometimes I would actually have them come close together. Or let's say if I have multiple characters, then I would have the pages sort of pushing on each other more. So it was just like little things like that hopefully you don't notice them consciously, but your brain, the part of your brain that's picking up all this hidden detail will pick it up, and that'll interpret itself as anxiety, as suspense, as a suspense buildup.
Right.
And sometimes stuff like that, where I would just take one entire panel, just one page.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I love how you set that up. Uh, so, what were some of the plot line of it is split up into three parts. What was the reasoning that you had it split up into a part one, two, three? What was the
Mm,
intention to have three parts?
initially, it was like you said. Initially, it was like a continuous thing.
Hmm.
But like when the whole thing was done, and I would look back over it, it felt like one straight line. Like the entire book felt like one flat line, and I felt that in some ways that undercut the power of, let's say, when the interrogation reaches a certain point in the narrative. Like I feel like that first part is very intense and suspenseful. But if I just simply jump into something else, it causes a bit of a jolt to the reader because the tone changes. And I felt that in like on a micro, looking on an individual part, it's good, but on a macro, it hurts the book as a whole. So I was like, okay, why don't I break this into art? Let me actually literally put like a black page, put a part one, and then when that part is over, I will put another page with nothing in between. And going back to cinema as an analogy, what that does is you as the reader, it gives you like a little breather. Like the interrogation is very intense, it's relentless. They keep coming back at him from different angles. Like if you ever had the Matt fortune to be interrogated by police, that's kind of what it feels like if you have been in a situation like that.
Right.
So that page and that little part too, what it does, it gives you like a little. It's almost like a fade to black. And you were watching something in streaming or movies or TV. It's like a little moment where you just sort of catch your breath, and we start over, and the tone changes. So I felt that adding part one, part two, gave it a little breather to the reader, and it prepared you for the next part, which was going to be a little slow. Or I shouldn't say slow, but it was going to be a different tone. It was a little slower pace and tone, and gradually would build in a different direction. The suspense would be coming from a different direction, I guess. Like I would say, the first part, the suspense comes from the relentlessness and from the pacing and from that cropping where the protagonist sometimes is kind of trapped in between the other characters asking him questions. The second part is also, how would I say this? Well, it's an info dump. I was trying to think of a nice way to say info dump, but that's what it is. It's just sort of, there's a lot that you don't know yet, but you need for the final part. So, okay, let's just slow things down and start doing info dump, and hopefully in a way that doesn't feel like an info dump. It's a way where you're a participant. Let's say you as a reader, you're participating. You're learning things right along with the protagonist, and that also took us to part three, where part two ends in such a shocking confrontational situation that I felt, well, I think I need another break here because again, part three begins with yet another a tone shift. So again, another breather, another little fade to black that gives people a chance to catch up, so that when we start over again, I actually part three starts even slower. Like I feel like I actually deliberately went even slower because by then maybe, hopefully, you're still reading by then as a reader, and I'm easing you further and further into that. I guess each part starts a little slower. Each part begins a little bit slower to sort of not jolt you so much into it. Because I feel the first part is like a jolt. It's a very intense jolt thing. And I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of books, narratives that throw you into the middle of things, because you kind of, if I find in my experience, some like when I see online, people complain about that, about things have being too fast paced. But I find that if you just simply relax and read and keep reading, eventually you catch up to everything. And I prefer that. I like the idea of being a participant, of reading and just gradually learning, because you're not just simply being told things. You're learning. You're a participant. You're almost like alongside the protagonist. So I kind of tried to go for that when I was doing this. I was trying to keep you involved, keeping you interested in the process, hopefully interested and curious about what's going on. So
Okay.
that was the reason for that, to give a little breather and to sort of ease you into the next part. And that way, the overall tone of the book, if I were to draw it like on a chart, it would probably something like this. And
Okay.
then boom, on the third
Right.
part.
You wrote and made some of these drawings back in 2018, correct?
Yes, 2018 through maybe the early part of 2019, or maybe I'm only 2018. I cannot remember.
It was. I think it was looking at doing the research. It looked like a lot of this was in 2018. So, what was the pause between 2018 and say 2020, 2021 when you were actually putting the book together?
Okay, well, so very likely, I cannot remember exactly, but very likely what happened was I had opportunity to make short films again. Like I had an opportunity to work with some people, make some short films, and I
Mm-hmm.
kind of go along with it, hoping that well, maybe this time we'll finally put enough people together to make a feature because it's the thing that I want to do the most. Like in the same way that I made the book, I want to make the movie. The
Right.
feature thing, not the shorts. I was kind of fed up with shorts, but I kind of go along with it because at least well, I'm shooting video, I'm editing, and all that. So most of 2018 goes by, and while I did do one or two little short pieces in comic book, I made a few shorts. And then 2020 starts, and then eventually like COVID starts sweeping everything, and for a while nothing is possible. And in the early part of lockdown, after the initial part where people started getting together again, I go out with some the same people again to make another short film. But again, nothing happens. We go out and shoot video, and nothing comes of that. It's actually then it never got finished. As far as I know, the thing never got finished, edited, or anything. So I kind of fall back again into this, and I just say, okay, if they approach me again, I'm turning them down. I'm just gonna say no because they're just not going to the next step. I want to go to the next step. So I'm gonna take that energy, that sort of restless energy, and put it into this. And the result is this, like all these ideas that I had about movies, about pacing, I just threw them into this because I couldn't put them into a movie. I couldn't test them out on filmmaking, on live action. So I just kind of threw them into this.
Right. Yeah, this was such a fun thing. This was such a fun read. It was, as you say, there was definitely some reminiscent of this the government conspiracy, the Men in Black, all of these really fun you know cover up shadow government things that were so fun to read, and I love the tension of it. I love the stylized artwork and how you had everything set up. Definitely, I would say for any of our listeners and viewers out there who like this stuff, where can they get a copy of the plot?
So I created a Gumroad, and on that Gumroad, there's a download link. I am working on putting together a website. Actually, it's ready, but we're having a hard time figuring out how to put the Gumroad link onto the website. So your best bet right now is if you have a Twitter, look me up on Twitter. My handle on Twitter is called Robopulp.
Mm-hmm.
The first part is Robo, as in robot. The second part, Pulp, as in pulp. So Robopulp. And on my profile, at the bottom of the profile, there's a link there. If you have an Instagram, I am there as robo.pulp. And I also put a link there as well. So those are
Okay.
the two best places right now to find it because those are the platforms that I'm most active on, particularly Twitter. I'm quite a bit on Twitter. I really don't do much on Insta, but I'm on Twitter quite a bit. So that would be the best place. And hopefully, once I have a website, I'll start exploring other forms of storytelling. I'll explore audio drama as well. I'll probably come back around to comics. I'm trying prose and film. Film is still the first passion. It's something so exciting when film is done well. It's such a fantastic medium to work with. And the same way with
Right.
comics. Comics, when it's done well, it just takes you places where very few things can. Comics is just such a fantastic thing. You can there's just permutations are endless. What you can do with combining images and text, there's really no limit to what you can do in comics.
Right. No, this has been great. So definitely, so check it out, and we'll have the link in the show notes. You can go to robopulp.gumroad.com to get a copy of Pay As You Want, the plot, which I say is it's a really fun read, very stylized. I love from a graphic design perspective. It was really fun. And yeah, also check out Melvin at on Twitter at Robopulp, ROBOPULP. Come back on when you want to chat about your next project.
Thank you so
All right.
much for the feedback and thank you so much for inviting me. I would love to come back. I would love to just chat about, creating in general, creating. Let's
Yeah.
comics are great, but other mediums require different creative muscles. So,
Right.
do all of them. Do whatever you can. Any of those of you out there who are cartoonists themselves. If making a comic book is difficult, switch to audio dramas. If that is difficult, switch to doing something else. If you have an iPhone, you essentially have a multimedia studio right there.
Right. Perfect. Well, all right. Well, thanks a lot, Melvin. Appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me over. I would love to come back. Yeah, it's been such a blast. I appreciate that you made the time to talk to me today.
You're welcome. All right, here we go. Let me get all right, Mel Cartagena.
Yes, Mel Cartagena. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are or how far and wide this podcast goes.
Oh yeah,
it's always afternoon or evening somewhere in the world.
Oh yeah, let me do my intro. That wasn't the intro yet. Don't worry.
Oh, okay. I see the clock, so I'm assuming that we're already going. So okay.
Yeah. All right. Let me do the intro. This is just the banter. All right.
Good vibes so far. It'll be a fun intro.